What if I told you that America almost destroyed itself? Not from a foreign enemy, not from a war, but from something far more dangerous, its own success. There was a time when a handful of men controlled more wealth than entire nations, when children as young as 8 worked in coal mines until their lungs turned black, when one phone call from a banker could crash the entire economy. This isn't ancient history. This is America, just over a century ago. And here's the terrifying part. The same patterns are happening again, right now, in our lifetime. But this story isn't about doom. It's about the incredible moment when ordinary people decided enough was enough, when they fought back against impossible odds and won. If you love stories about money, power, and the secret battles that shaped our world, hit that subscribe button right now. Here at Monetary Archaeologist, we dig up the financial secrets that history tried to bury. Now let's uncover the truth about how America almost tore itself apart. Picture America in the late 1800s. Railroads are slicing across the continent like steel veins. Factories are pumping out more goods than the world has ever seen. Oil is transforming everything from transportation to lighting. Money is flowing faster than anyone thought possible. On the surface, it looks like a miracle, the American dream in full bloom. But underneath, a nightmare was growing. See, this wasn't just growth. This was something else entirely. A small group of men were building private empires so powerful they made the government look weak, and I mean weak. John D. Rockefeller didn't just sell oil, he crushed anyone who tried to compete. His company, Standard Oil, controlled over 90% of American oil refining. 90%! One man, one company. Total domination. But Rockefeller was just the beginning. J.P. Morgan ran a bank so powerful that when the economy collapsed, the government didn't fix it. They called Morgan. One private citizen had more control over American money than the entire federal government. Let that sink in for a moment. Andrew Carnegie built a steel empire worth billions in today's money. Jay Gould manipulated railroads and stock markets like they were his personal chessboard. These men didn't play by the rules. They made the rules. And everyone else had to survive within their system. The newspapers called it the Gilded Age. Gilded, as in covered with a thin layer of gold to hide what's rotting underneath. And what was rotting underneath was the lives of ordinary Americans. Now I need you to imagine something. Really picture this. You wake up at 4 in the morning. Your body aches from yesterday's 12-hour shift. You're not even 30 years old, but your back is already failing. Your lungs burn from the coal dust or the factory smoke or the chemical fumes. You have no choice but to get up. Because if you miss work, you're fired. No second chances, no sick leave, no unemployment insurance, nothing. You walk to the factory or the mine. There are no safety rules. Machines aren't guarded. Ventilation doesn't exist. Last week, a man lost his arm in the machinery. The company replaced him by lunchtime. And here's what really makes your blood boil. Your 8-year-old child is walking to work too. Not school, work. Because your family cannot survive on just your wages. This wasn't rare. This was normal. Millions of American children worked in factories, mines, and mills. Their small hands were perfect for cleaning dangerous machinery. Their small bodies could fit into tight spaces in coal mines. Many of them never grew up to be adults. If you complained, if you tried to organize, if you demanded better conditions, the company called in private detectives, or militias, or sometimes actual federal troops. Workers who protested were beaten, shot, killed. The message was clear. You are replaceable. The machine is not. Meanwhile, the men at the top were building mansions with hundreds of rooms, throwing parties that cost more than a worker would earn in 10 lifetimes, buying senators like groceries. This wasn't just unfair. This was a powder keg waiting to explode. And explode it did. In 1873, the American economy didn't just stumble, it collapsed. Banks failed by the hundreds. Railroads went bankrupt. Unemployment skyrocketed. The Depression lasted 6 brutal years. Families that had nothing lost even that. But the rich, they found ways to survive. Sometimes they even got richer by buying up the wreckage at pennies on the dollar. 20 years later, it happened again. The Panic of 1893 wiped out more than 500 banks. 15,000 businesses vanished overnight. 1/4 of American workers lost their jobs. People were starving, actually starving. In the richest country on earth. In 1877, railroad workers had finally had enough. They went on strike. The companies responded with violence. What followed was chaos across multiple cities. Workers fought militias in the streets, buildings burned, people died. This wasn't an economic downturn. This was a society tearing itself apart. And here's what everyone in power refused to admit. The system they built was fundamentally broken. An economy that only worked for a tiny elite was not an economy. It was a ticking time bomb. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Americans didn't accept their fate. They didn't shrug and say, "This is just how things are." They fought back, and they started winning. The first real shot came in 1890 with something called the Sherman Antitrust Act. Now, the name sounds boring, but the idea was revolutionary. For the first time in American history, the government declared that the economy was not the private property of a few wealthy men. It belonged to everyone. And when companies got so big they crushed all competition, that was now illegal. At first, the law was toothless. Courts ignored it. Politicians were too scared or too bought to enforce it. The rich laughed it off. But the law planted a seed, an idea that would eventually crack their empires wide open. Then came the writers, the investigators, the journalists who refused to look away. Ida Tarbell spent years investigating Standard Oil. She documented every dirty trick, every bribe, every competitor destroyed. When her work was published, Americans finally saw what Rockefeller really was. Not a genius businessman, a ruthless monopolist who rigged the entire game. Upton Sinclair went undercover in the meatpacking industry. What he found was so disgusting that when his book came out, the entire nation was horrified. He described rotting meat, diseased animals, and workers falling into rendering tanks. People across the country put down their breakfast and demanded change. These journalists were called muckrakers. They dug through the muck to find the truth. And once Americans saw the truth, they couldn't unsee it. Public opinion shifted, slowly at first, then like a flood. The wealthy could buy politicians, they could buy newspapers, but they couldn't buy back their reputation, not anymore. Then came the man who changed everything. Theodore Roosevelt was loud, aggressive, almost theatrical. He had energy that exhausted everyone around him. And he had absolutely no fear of the men who thought they owned America. When Roosevelt became president in 1901, the wealthy class assumed he would play along. He was from money himself. He knew the right people. Surely he would understand. They were catastrophically wrong. Roosevelt understood something the rich had forgotten. Their power depended on public tolerance, and public tolerance was evaporating. He went after the Northern Securities Company first. This was a massive railroad monopoly backed by the most powerful men in America.
including J.P. Morgan himself. When Morgan heard about the lawsuit, he went to the White House personally. He told Roosevelt they could work this out like gentlemen. Just send your man to talk to my man. Roosevelt refused. The government wasn't going to negotiate with monopolies. It was going to break them. And he did. The Supreme Court ruled against Northern Securities. For the first time, a major trust had been dismantled. Roosevelt didn't stop there. He strengthened railroad regulation. He pushed for meat inspection laws. He expanded federal power to oversee business practices. He changed what the presidency meant. Before Roosevelt, presidents were weak compared to the titans of industry. After Roosevelt, the government became a real counterweight to corporate power. And Roosevelt made something very clear. He didn't hate business. He hated business so powerful it threatened democracy itself. But even Roosevelt couldn't prevent what came next. In 1907, the financial system froze. Banks ran out of money. Credit vanished. The entire economy stood at the edge of total collapse. And who saved it? Not the government. The government didn't have the tools. J.P. Morgan saved it. One man. He called the most powerful bankers to his personal library. He literally locked the doors until they agreed to a rescue plan. It worked. The panic ended. But think about what that means. A single private citizen had more power to save or destroy the American economy than the actual government. That terrified people, and it should have. If Morgan decided to let the system burn, he could have. If he made different choices, millions would have suffered. The fate of an entire nation rested on the decisions of one unelected man sitting in his library. 6 years later, America created the Federal Reserve, a central bank.
A public institution designed to make sure no private individual would ever hold that kind of power again. The reforms kept coming. Early child labor laws pulled kids out of factories. Workplace safety standards began appearing. States experimented with workers' compensation. The 8-hour workday stopped being a fantasy and started becoming real. And with the 16th Amendment, the federal income tax arrived. Finally, the government had a tool to address the obscene concentration of wealth at the very top. For a moment, America had done something remarkable. It didn't destroy capitalism. It didn't become socialist. It disciplined the system, made it work for everyone instead of just the few. The Gilded Age didn't collapse on its own. Americans dismantled it, piece by piece, reform by reform. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Those reforms didn't fail. They were forgotten. And in economic history, forgetting is never innocent. It's always a choice, a drift, an erosion that happens through influence, lobbying, and the return of an old lie. The lie goes like this. Markets regulate themselves. Concentrated wealth is efficient. The public good automatically emerges from private greed. Government is the problem, never the solution. By the 1980s, this thinking had taken over. Regulations were rolled back. Taxes on the wealthy plummeted. Unions were crushed. Finance was unleashed. Corporate mergers exploded without scrutiny. It didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened through 1,000 small cuts, each one defended as modernization, each one quietly rebuilding the same system the progressives fought to destroy. And now, look at where we are. The top 1% of Americans holds almost 40% of the nation's wealth. The bottom half holds about 2 to 3%. In 2023 alone, 19 families added roughly $1 trillion to their fortunes. 1 trillion. 19 families. Does that sound familiar? It should. These numbers mirror the Gilded Age almost exactly. And it's not just wealth. Look at labor. The 8-hour day that workers died for is increasingly a joke. Gig workers have no benefits, no stability, no protection. Wages have been stagnant for decades, while housing and healthcare costs explode. And in some states, lawmakers are actually rolling back child labor protections, allowing teenagers to work longer hours with fewer safeguards. The same kids the progressives fought to protect are being pushed back toward danger. Meanwhile, new monopolies have risen. Standard Oil has become big tech. Railroad trusts have become digital platforms that control entire ecosystems of economic life. The old monopolies bought newspapers. The new ones control the algorithms that determine what information you even see. We're living in a second Gilded Age. Different technology, same game. So where does this leave us? It would be easy to feel hopeless. The forces are so powerful. The money is so concentrated. The system seems so rigged. But that's exactly how people felt in 1890. They looked at Rockefeller and Morgan and Carnegie and saw men who seemed untouchable, invincible, inevitable. They were wrong. The central lesson of this entire story isn't despair, it's transformation. The pressure of inequality didn't break America, it changed America. And here's what you need to understand. The United States didn't fix the Gilded Age by accident. It didn't rely on charity from the wealthy. It didn't wait for the market to magically correct itself. Reform happened because ordinary people demanded it, because journalists exposed the truth, because politicians felt real pressure, because crises forced the country to confront what happens when private empires grow without limits. Those forces haven't disappeared, they're just dormant. The guardrails still exist. Antitrust law is still on the books. Labor protections can be strengthened. Safety nets can be rebuilt. Financial regulations can be restored. The rules of capitalism are not natural laws like gravity. They are human creations. And what humans create, humans can change. The wealthy have influence, enormous influence. But this country is bigger than any handful of elites. That was true in 1900, it's true right now. History shows us that the pendulum always swings back. Societies cannot survive extreme inequality forever. Something always breaks, and when it breaks, change becomes possible. A century ago, Americans reimagined their entire economy. They broke up monopolies, they protected workers, they regulated finance, they built the middle class. They did it without perfect unity, without perfect plans, but they did it. And the reason they succeeded is the same reason we can, because the rules are made by people, and people can rewrite them. The Gilded Age didn't end itself. Americans ended it. They fought, they organized, they exposed, they demanded, and eventually they won. That's not nostalgia, that's precedent. The same fight is happening again, right now. The question is whether enough people will remember what worked last time.
If this story changed how you see the economy, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling me what financial mystery you want uncovered next. Here at Monetary Archaeologist, we dig up the secrets that shaped your money, your power, and your future. The past isn't dead, it's waiting to teach us. See you in the next one.